But let's jump in, and I'm going to try to finish up spinal cord in lab today. Okay, but I do want to talk about spinal nerves again. I want to jump back into the spinal nerves, and I feel like we have a pretty decent understanding of the spinal nerve. Well, at least what happens coming and going into the spinal cord. Now, if you remember, right, of course, we have. That's awful. But anyways, right. So here's our spinal nerve. Okay, and then the spinal nerve has, all right, it's a mixed nerve, as we all know, and the back portion is going to be made up of sensory neurons. The front portion here is going to be made up of motor neurons. Where they come together is the spinal nerve. But we're going to talk about life after the spinal nerve, because the spinal nerve will travel for a little bit and then it gives off some branches. So we're going to talk about that. Okay? So keep in mind, we talked about this in the last class, that the back portion is called the posterior, all right, I'll abbreviate it, root or rootlets, right, and that is going to be sensory only, and then the front is going to be the anterior, I'm just going to put ant, and that's going to be the anterior rootlets, and that's going to be motor only, okay? That's going to be information leaving the spinal cord, and the posterior rootlets or sensory portion is going to be information entering into the spinal cord. Okay, so our spinal nerves reside partially in the vertebral canal there, but then they exit the spine, vertebral spine, through the intervertebral foramen. And then the spinal nerve will start to split. The first branch that it gives, and it's a small branch, this is important that you know this, this will innervate the muscles, the deep muscles of the back and the skin of the back. So I'm going to come right back to the slide here. That's what this is. All right, so here's the spinal nerve, and you got this first branch that comes off, and that's the posterior ramus. So you can see it's innervating the deep muscles of the spine here on the back, and then it's going, this is supposed to be representing the skin, right? So the posterior ramus is a branch off of the spinal nerve, okay? And so it is going to innervate the muscles of the back and the skin of the back, okay? So the larger branch, it's kind of like a continuation of the spinal nerve, right? That's referred to as the anterior ramus. Right? Now it's going to, there's going to be some other branches, and we'll talk about that, okay? It's the anterior ramus, right, that's going to form these plexuses. Remember those plexuses that we labeled last class? The cervical plexus, the brachial plexus, the lumbar sacral, all that, okay? So these anterior rami are going to contribute to the formation of these plexuses, okay? So it's going to, the anterior rami, right, are going to innervate, okay, the front and the side of the trunk, because the back, all right, is innervated by the posterior ramus, okay? So that only leaves the front and the sides. So that's going to be innervated by the anterior ramus, right, in the trunk. And then the anterior rami will contribute to the plexuses that we're going to talk about later on, which leaves us the upper and lower limbs. Okay? If you want to remember it like that, you can. Okay? So the posterior ramus is going to innervate the muscles in the skin of the back, and the anterior ramus is going to innervate everything on the side and the front, plus the upper and lower extremities. Okay? And then finally, we have this structure here called the rami communicantes. And there are these small branches, but not just that. Make a note of it. They are autonomic fibers. Okay? Autonomic fibers, not somatic, autonomic. Okay? And these fibers will travel to the sympathetic trunk. You guys remember the sympathetic trunk? That was the last slide that we labeled last time. It was that structure that sat, I told you, that ran parallel to the vertebral column on either side. It was just on either side. Okay? That's what the sympathetic trunk is. Okay? So these rami communicants will then extend into that sympathetic trunk. We'll get into that in a little bit. All right? So it is parallel to the vertebral column, and it helps to connect, all right, the spinal cord and all that to the sympathetic trunk. All right, these rami communicants. I'll show you a picture here. Communicantes, communicants, whatever you want to call them. Okay, so here's that posterior ramus. All right, and then here's our anterior ramus. Then off here of the anterior ramus here, all right, you've got these guys right here. These are the rami communicantes right here. Little branches here. And I'll get into that, right? Because one of these branches has information going in, another one has information coming out. Okay? And this is supposed to be the sympathetic trunk, but it's a transverse section of it. Right? But you can see how it's outside of our spine here, outside of the vertebral column. Spinal cord's inside, right? The sympathetic trunk, right, is going to be outside. Okay? All right, so we talked about the dermatome, so I'm going to skip past that. We're going to talk about our nerve plexuses. Okay? So it's important that you understand what a nerve plexus is. Now, I made it simple last class and told you it's just a group of nerves, all right? But specifically, all right, it's going to be a network of the anterior rami, okay? We say that they're interweaving because they'll connect to one another. Some will run parallel, some will connect over, right? So it's just kind of like a can of worms mishmash kind of structure, okay? All right. So there's 4 of them that we're going to discuss here, right? We've got the cervical, right? The brachial, the lumbar, and the sacral. They're on both sides there. So let's jump into, well, before we get into the plexuses, let me talk about the intercostal nerves here. Okay. One other fact, though, right? These rami here, which is actually quite helpful, is that they will branch not just once or twice, but they'll repeatedly branch. So if you damage one spinal segment, don't worry about it. All right, because it's branching, you might be able to preserve, all right, the muscle innervation and the sensory innervation to the skin, to those regions there. Okay, so it's kind of like a redundancy kind of a situation. So before we jump into the plexuses, let's just quickly talk about the intercostal nerves because they're the easiest ones. Right? We labeled those last time. Remember I told you the intercostal nerves are going to be these nerves that are located between the ribs. Obviously intercostal and between the ribs. Right? But what they're made up of are going to be the anterior rami of those spinal nerves for segments T1 through T11. Right? T12 we give a special name, and that's called the subcostal nerve. Okay? Right? That's made up of the anterior rami. Again, they follow the ribs. So when we were looking on this dermatome chart, you see how easy the ribs are? I mean, or at least the thoracic region. All these are pretty uniform because they follow along the rib distribution there. Okay? It gets a little funky when we get into the cervical spine because you got the cervical dermatomes going down in the arms. And same with the lumbar. Right? The lumbar kind of stretched down in the legs and some of the and the sacral there. Right? But the thoracic, pretty easy, right? And that's mainly because of that distribution of the intercostal nerves there. Okay? Right. So a couple just quick points here. All right, the T1 ramus here is going to actually be a part of the brachial plexus. In fact, T1, right, is going to be found. I hate to go jump off this slide here real quick. Keep doing this to you guys. If you look in our dermatome map, whoops, you can see that T1 is found on the medial side of your arm. Okay, so it's not up here solely. It's partially up in the chest area here in the thorax, but part of it goes down into your arm. Okay, so it becomes part of the brachial plexus. All right, Wait, I'm sorry. Wrong slide. There we go. Okay. And then T2, all right, this one here is going to innervate not just the in between the ribs and the thorax there, but also part of the axilla, your armpit there. Okay. T3 through T6 is going to innervate your intercostal muscles, the external and internal intercostals. Right? And then T7 through 12 is going to innervate lower intercostal muscles and some of your abdominal muscles. Right? But all of these are going to innervate, like on that dermatome map that we saw, right, pretty much segmentally all the way down your thorax and your abdomen. You can see this real nice picture here. Okay? Well, here you can see, well, let's zoom in. All right, here's your spinal nerve. There's your posterior ramus going off the back, and then the anterior rami just kind of swings around here, right? And it comes around and follows the rib all the way to the front. So it's going to have that segmental innervation there, right? Pretty much following the distribution of the nerves themselves. All right, cervical plexus. This is the one that's up in the neck here. It's going to be made up of the anterior rami of C1 through C4. Right. Now C5 will have a few, but most of C5 is going to contribute to the brachial plexus. Okay. So these rami, C1 through C4, are going to innervate the anterior neck muscles. Well, what are those? All right, your scalenes. Remember some of those? Some of the hypoglossal muscles we didn't really get into. Not hypoglossal muscles, but don't come to me. Pharyngeal muscles. Jeez, Lord. My brain. All right. Obviously, the skin of the neck, and then parts of your head and shoulders. Okay. And we saw this labeling last week. Oh, wait. Yeah, last week. All right. The phrenic nerve. Remember the phrenic nerve, that one nerve that sat on top in front of the anterior scalene muscle? We were talking about hiccups and whatnot. It comes from the anterior rami of C3 through C5. How we remember that is C3, C4, and C5 help to keep your diaphragm alive. So I remember that. Okay? So phrenic nerve innervates the diaphragm. So you can see here in our cervical plexus, okay, here are the anterior rami, okay, C1, C2, C3, C4, part of C5, right, but they all kind of come together. And you can see how they're giving off all these multiple branches here, okay? This is as far as I'm going to get into the details, guys. Don't worry, because when I was in school, they made us memorize the cervical, not the cervical, the brachial plexus, and holy moly, that was no fun. Okay, brachial plexus. That's made up of the anterior rami of C5 through T1. Okay, so the brachial plexus is going to be located just lateral to your neck, and it's going to extend from the lateral portion of your neck down into your armpit, into your axilla. Okay. Now there's specific regions of the brachial plexus. So being close, this is going to be more medial. As we go down our list, this is going to be more lateral. So the anterior rami are going to be closest to the spinal cord, all right? And then they'll create the trunks, which will then give rise to the divisions, which will finally give rise to the cords, and then eventually it'll give rise to actual nerves. Okay. I'm not going to get into too much, just to let you know that these trunks here, at the posterior triangle of the neck, is going to be this region that's going to be found on the lateral posterior portion of your neck. Right. There's three components: the superior, middle, and inferior. Right. Just know that the superior trunk is made up of C5, C6. The middle trunk is C7, and then the inferior trunk is C8 through T1. And then the trunks will give rise to the divisions, right? And that's easy because you have an anterior and posterior divisions. And these divisions are then going to innervate front and back of your arms. Okay? And then these divisions will start to, let me see if I can find a better picture. There we go. All right, so here are the rami. All right, and the rami, all right, are going to converge and create the three trunks, right, superior, middle, and inferior. And then the three trunks will then divide and then give us our divisions, the anterior division and then the posterior division, right? And then it's those divisions that will eventually give rise to, all right, the cords down here, and then finally our nerves, okay? All right. I'm going to just jump right into the nerves because the cords are relatively not terribly important. All right. So, 5 nerves that you want to be familiar with: axillary, median, musculocutaneous, radial, and ulnar. Right? Axillary, right, is going to be closer to your shoulder. Right? So it's going to innervate the deltoid muscle, teres major, and then it's going to give rise to the sensory information, or the dermatome area of the superior side of your arm. So we're here. The lateral side. Whoops, can't see that. Right here. Okay? That's going to be deltoid. Or, I'm sorry, axillary. Okay, the next is the median nerve. Now, this nerve, all right, innervates a lot. Right? It's going to innervate the anterior forearm muscles, which are your flexor muscles, all the muscles in your thumb, okay? And then some of the muscles in your fingers, they're called the lateral lumbricals. Those are the muscles that are on the side of your fingers there. Okay? And then the median nerve is going to be responsible for the sensory information, all right, on the tips of your fingers, okay, except for the pinky, and then the palmar side, all right, so on the front part of your hand there. Musculocutaneous nerve, this is going to be the anterior arm muscle. That's going to be biceps brachii, cortical brachialis, brachialis, right? And then it's going to receive its sensory input on the lateral portion of your forearm. Radial nerve is going to be on the back side of your arm, so that is going to include your triceps brachii, right? And it's also going to include the extensor muscles of your forearm, or the posterior forearm muscles. And then it gets its sensory innervation from the backside of your arm, right, where your triceps are, and forearm, and then on this backside, the lateral portion of the backside of your hand. And then finally, ulnar is going to be the nerve that is going to innervate the anterior forearm muscles, all right, flexing, and then some of the smaller muscles inside the palm of your hand and then your fingers there. All right. We'll talk more about the nerves there when you get into 210, 11. That's you're in 210 now. So here you can see, all right, here is your median nerve going down on the medial portion of your arm, and it's going to go all the way on the anterior portion. It's the only nerve that travels through your what? Carpal tunnel. Oh yeah. So the nerve that gets compromised, right, when you have carpal tunnel is the median nerve. Right? So median nerve innervates flexor muscles of your forearm, but also remember I told you it innervates your thenar, the thumb muscles. All right, the thenar eminence is this pad right here at the base of your thumb. And so people, when they start to get early on signs of carpal tunnel, will have weakness in those muscles. So they'll start to drop things more often. And so that's one of the early on symptoms that people notice when they start to have carpal tunnel, is that they're dropping. All right. Let's talk about the lumbar plexus here. All right. The lumbar plexus is made up of the anterior rami of L1 through L4. Okay. And so we've got the femoral nerve and the obturator nerve. The femoral nerve is going to be made up of, right, mainly the posterior division of the lumbar plexus. So the femoral nerve innervates all the muscles on the front of your leg, not leg, but on the front of your thigh, right? So your quadriceps, and that includes sartorius, right? That long muscle that likes to drape across the front of your thigh and then insert on the medial portion of your knee, okay? So it's going to get its sensory input from the front of your thigh, then also on the inside but lower portion of the thigh and on the inside of your leg, okay? Then the obturator nerve is the other named nerve that comes off the lumbar plexus, and it is formed from the anterior divisions. Okay, so obturator nerve is going to innervate the medial thigh muscles, also known as adductors. Right, so adductor longus, all right, gracilis, adductor magnus. All those are going to be innervated by the obturator nerve. It's also going to receive sensory input from the upper portion of the inside of your thigh. Okay. Here's the lumbar plexus here. Okay, so you can see you got L1, L2, L3, and L4. Right? And they're all going to give rise to the anterior and posterior divisions. So the posterior divisions are going to help to form the femoral nerve, right? And then the anterior divisions are going to help to form the obturator nerve. So you can see here, if you look at the nerve distribution here, you can see the femoral nerve is coming down here and innervating these muscles on the anterior portion of your thigh, right? Whereas the obturator nerve is going to be more on the inside of your thigh. And then we got the sacral plexus. Is that all of them? Yeah, the sacral plexus is the last of the plexuses. Plexuses. All right. That's made up of the anterior rami of L4 and L5. Okay. So the big nerve that comes out of this plexus is the sciatic nerve. Okay. This is the largest, longest nerve of the body. Okay. It has portions of both the anterior and posterior divisions. All right. But for the most part, the anterior division is going to innervate your flexor muscles. Posterior division is going to innervate the extensor muscles. Right? But the sciatic nerve has portions of both the anterior and the posterior. Now, the sciatic nerve divides into two nerves, and you need to know, well, you should know these. All right, you got the tibial nerve and the common fibular nerve. Okay? This usually happens around the knee, or the back side of the knee, which is called the popliteal fossa. Again, you'll see this again in 211. I just kind of want to give you a little bit of a, I can't even think right now. I want to give you a little heads up for it. Sorry. All right. So tibial nerve and then the common fibular nerve, right? Also known as the common peroneal nerve. But the tibial nerve, both of these nerves come from the sciatic. So when the sciatic divides, the anterior division is going to be called the tibial nerve. Right? It's going to innervate the hamstring muscles. All right, and then also the adductor magnus portion of that hamstring part. Adductor magnus is we didn't really see it on our models. Right? It's a large muscle, right? And it does help, right? with certain muscle movements in and around the knee and obviously the hips there, right? But there's actually a portion of the adductor magnus muscle that is considered what we call the hamstring portion there because of its location and its size here, right? Well, this this nerve then eventually divides again into the lateral and medial plantar nerves, right? And basically, this is going to innervate all these muscles on the bottom of your foot, right? The ventral surface of your foot. Okay? So it receives its sensory information for the bottom of your foot, the sole there. The common fibular nerve or peroneal nerve is the posterior division of the sciatic, right? It's going to innervate the short head of the biceps femoris muscle And then it too divides into the deep fibular nerve and the superficial fibular nerve, right? And then the deep fibular nerve is going to innervate the deeper muscles, right, on the posterior region, right, of your calf. And then superficial is going to be the lateral muscles there. All right. And here you can see the plexus here. Okay, so here's the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve is going to get contributions from both the posterior division and the anterior division. And then the sciatic nerve will eventually split off into the common fibular and the tibial division. And you can see the extent of the sciatic nerve as it travels all the way down the backside of your leg, and then bifurcates into the common fibular and the tibial nerve right here around the back portion of the popliteal fossa of the knee. These are the sciatic nerve will branch off into these two. Yep. All right, that's it for. I didn't think I was going to get through that fast, but let's do some labeling. Label our label the spinal cord, and then we'll be done. The spinal cord. Well, now. Oh, we are right. We're actually done with it in lecture 2. What am I saying? All right. Sorry, y'all. I don't know where my brain is tonight. All right, so this is going to be. We're going to do the transverse dissections here, right, for the spinal cord. Last class we did the longitudinal ones. Okay. So now we're going to look at the different layers of the spinal cord and all the structures that are involved here. Okay. So let's jump on in. And you can see, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. Okay. Now it looks blue here. Again, this model is supposed to be representing the periosteum, and as we all know, the periosteum is the outer covering of bone. Okay. So it is pointing to that bluish. This is supposed to represent the periosteum right here. Okay. So when you go get an epidural, they have to inject that needle. They're not going to go through the bone, but they're going through the space between the bone, and they're going to go into this space here, and you get a spinal tap. Right. So when you're going to, if they want to withdraw your cerebrospinal fluid, if they're suspecting meningitis or some other issue that you may be having, right, they have to go through all that. I'll talk about this. When you get an epidural, all right, they're just going to be giving that medication here into the epidural space. Now, if you look here, actually, that'll lead me into this part. If you look there into the epidural space, we see that. That's wonderful, remember? Because don't we talked about that? Oh, golly, I can't speak tonight. We talked about that before. When they give us certain types of injections, right? They like to give you injections into highly vascularized tissue. Okay? Muscle is a highly vascularized tissue, but so is fat. All right? So when we give you an epidural injection, you can see all these blood vessels that are here. All right? But also we want to numb these nerves, all right? So whatever the reason you're giving the epidural for, whether it be for childbirth or if you have to do some sort of surgical procedure, right, you're able to numb that area, right? But all of this tissue here helps with the absorption rate of that. Okay, so this yellow structure here, that's the epidural fat. Then just deep to that is going to be the first layer, all right, of our meninges. That's the dura mater. This guy right out here. This is made up of that dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay? And then just deep to the dura mater, that is going to be the arachnoid mater. Okay, so that's this layer here. And you can see a slight space in between those two layers there, that dark line. Okay? It's a subdural space. In the brain, it's a potential space. Okay? You can see it represented here, right? Very little space in between those two layers of the meninges. And deep to the arachnoid mater, we have our subarachnoid space. I'd be surprised if you guys did not get a question on what is significant about the subarachnoid space. I think we all feel good about what's there. What's in that space? Cerebrospinal fluid. Yeah. Well, oh yeah, I know. You're talking about the trabeculae. Oh, that's. And I was also thinking that. Yes, you do have the arachnoid trabeculae there, which is made up of it's those extensions there, okay, that help to create that space in there. All right. So then, deep to the subarachnoid space is pia mater. That's the soft mother, right? That's made of that loose areolar connective tissue, right? And it follows the contours of the spinal cord. You can see it, okay? All the nooks and crannies are occupied by the pia mater. Remember when we were doing the labeling last class, and we talked about the filum terminale, that thin strand that comes off the conus medullaris, that bottom portion of your spinal cord. Your spinal cord comes down, it ends right at L1, and there's this strand that comes all the way down that anchors onto coccyx. Right, that's made of pia mater, and its job is to anchor the spinal cord to inside of your vertebral canal, so it's not slamming around into stuff. Right? Do you guys remember what we called those spinal rootlets that hung down? Looks like a horse's tail. Right, yep. Caudia equina. That means horse's tail. Okay, good. Good. All right, now we're going to be going back and forth between two different models, okay? I'm going to be showing you pretty much the same structure, but on two different models here. Okay, so here on this model, we're seeing the white mater. Okay, specifically, this is the posterior funiculus. Now, white matter's fine. Okay, so what is significant about white matter? What is that? What's white matter made up of? Myelinated axons. That's right. So that's where you're going to see your tracts. 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 Okay, that's going to be located here. It's all myelinated axons. Okay. This is going to be the lateral funiculus here, and then the anterior funiculus is up. Okay, so you can see the white matter now on this model. Model here. Okay. So there's the white matter. Now let's talk about the gray matter. So on this model here, the arrow is pointing specifically to the gray matter, or you can use either the dorsal gray horn or the posterior gray horn. It's up to you. Okay? Either or. Okay, so that posterior or dorsal gray horn is all back here. That's a great question. You can either or. Computer mark you wrong, but I won't. Okay, and then there it is in this model. So in the gray horn, what type of neurons will you find there? What did you say? Oh, okay. That's no, all right. I see where you're going. How about are they going to be motor or sensory? Yep, sensory. Yep, good. That's what you'll find in the back. Remember, motor's in the front, like your car. All right. So now, where's the VW, the bug? Right. So here we're seeing now the lateral gray horn. Okay. That's going to be made up here. Now, this is only present from T1 to L2. Okay? And when we talk more about chapter 15, you'll know why. Right? But it has to do with the sympathetic nervous system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system. All right, but that's the lateral gray horn. Now, what type of neuron is found there? Sensory or motor? You got 50-50 chance. What'd you say? Yeah, you're right. Specifically autonomic visceral motor. Okay? So not somatic motor, but visceral or autonomic motor. Okay? There's nothing wrong by guessing wrong. I used to do it all the time in school, but that's how I learned. Just to let you know, I was that person that frequently asked questions in class. And after class, my classmates would say, "Thank you for asking some of the questions, not all of them," because I'm sure I got annoying. But at the same time, I'm like, listen, I'm paying a lot of money to be here. I'm gonna get my money's worth. You know what I'm saying? All right. Here you can see, okay, the lateral gray horn on this model, and that's going to be right here. Okay. Lateral gray horn. It's going to be autonomic or visceral motor neurons found there. Okay? Which means now I can take it to the next level and say, what tissues does that innervate? You guys know this. Other one. The other group. Smooth, cardiac, glands. That's right. Autonomic or visceral. Think of organs. Okay? Muscles, cardiac, and glands. Okay? Now, this is what you were thinking, Anna. Booyah. Here we go. Gray matter, the anterior or ventral gray horn. Okay? That's going to be made up of what type of neuron? Okay. Well, that's the tissue that it's going to innervate, but what type of neuron? Oh, you're taking it to that level. All right. All right. Yes, somatic motor neurons. I was just going to ask for motor or sensory, but all right. You're going there. I love it. Okay. So, yeah, that's going to be the somatic motor neuron. Okay. All right. Good, 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 good. All right. And then I'll show you on this model. Yeah. All right. So that's up here in the front. So again, these neurons are all sensory, and then these up front are all motor. Okay, sensory in the back, motor in the front. All right. Then at the center of our gray matter, right in the middle there, you got a hole there. That is our central canal. What's in the central canal? Remember? As you're labeling, what do you think? Cerebral spinal fluid. Great job. Yeah. Okay. Remember when we were talking about the ventricles up in the brain? The left lateral ventricle, the right lateral ventricle, then they both drain into the third ventricle, which drains into the fourth ventricle. Well, the fourth ventricle drains into the central canal. The central canal is lined with ependymal cells, so they're making cerebral spinal fluid. But that fourth canal drains fourth canal. The fourth ventricle, right? It drains down into the central canal. So there's spinal fluid, there's cerebral spinal fluid in that little hole there, and there's cerebral spinal fluid all throughout this area here too, the subarachnoid space. All right, here's the central canal in this model, right there, little hole in the middle. Then the central canal resides, all right, in what we call the gray commissure. The gray commissure is just where unmyelinated axons cross over from one side of the body to the other. Okay, so you can see the gray commissure on this model And then smack, there it is on this one. Okay, so now we're going to talk about these kind of, what do I want to call them? Depressions, right? And what I'm talking about is on the front of our spinal cord, you've got this depression here. This is a deeper depression, so we call that the anterior median fissure. Remember, a fissure is a deep depression, okay? We call it median because this thing is midline. It means directly midline. It's median. And obviously anterior because it's in the front. Right? So you can see it here on this model here. Anterior median fissure. Here it is again on this other model. That's the anterior median fissure. Right? But on the back, okay, we call it, obviously because it's on the back, the posterior median sulcus. Posterior median sulcus. And here you can see it on this model, posterior median sulcus. All right, just a couple more structures. So far, not too bad. Okay. All right, so now we're going to jump on this model and point out our posterior or dorsal root ganglion. Remember, that's that bulge, right, on the back side here. So you've got your spinal nerve, and then before it splits into the anterior and posterior portions, you have that bulge on the back side. What's in the posterior root ganglion? They cell bodies? That's what soma. Oh, soma. Yeah. Soma. Yeah. Cell bodies for the sensory neurons. Okay? So they reside here, and you know what else is in there? Chickenpox virus. Just sleeping, waiting. Okay? It sits in there. Okay? But okay, this is where you're going to find the cell bodies. I like this model better just because it's much more obvious to see it. Right? That's going to be your posterior or dorsal root ganglion. All right. And then here you can see the spinal nerve. Now, just after the posterior root ganglion, just this structure right here, that's the spinal nerve right there. Well, the spinal nerve, depending on which direction you're coming from, if you're going periphery to the spinal cord, it's just in front of the dorsal root ganglion. Right. I like it a little bit better on this other model. Easier to see. All right, spinal nerve. All right, so spinal nerve is made of both posterior roots or dorsal roots or anterior roots or ventral roots. I'll explain all that to you here in a second. All right, so you can see here in our model right here, okay, you have, hey, whoever's doing that, knock it off. So you got your dorsal root or sensory root of the spinal nerve. This is back here. Now you can call it the posterior root also. Okay, I believe your book calls it that. Some of these terms I'm just a little bit more used to, like dorsal and ventral, because that's what I learned. Right, so these are all sensory neurons here. Right, dorsal root, posterior root, the spinal nerve. Right, you can see it a little bit better on this picture here. Right. Then let's show the motor neurons. Right? Here's the ventral root or the motor root or anterior root of the spinal nerve. Right up here on the front. Did anyone else see that? I definitely. Well, everyone must have saw that. Did you guys? You didn't see it up there? Alex, do that again for a second. Can you guys see that? You guys can see that. All right. No one else can see that? All right. I'll make it disappear. Okay. All right. I noticed that. And I know that some people do that to kind of look around. As long as you're not writing profanity. All right. Okay. Ventral root. Oh, here we go. Let's do it on this model here. All right. There's the ventral. Now you can also call it the anterior root. I know it's not on this slide here, but you can also call it the anterior root. Or if you want to, you can call it the motor root. We talked about what happens. We saw both the posterior and anterior roots, all right, and both of those come together to form the spinal nerve. And now what happens, what we just learned today, what happens now to the spinal nerve branches that come off, that's what we're going to talk about now, okay? So the first branch, okay, that comes off of the spinal nerve, right? Remember, it's a small branch. It goes to those deep muscles that sit on your back, and it innervates the skin on your back, right? That's the dorsal, or you can actually call it the posterior ramus. It's up to you. You can call it the posterior ramus if you want. Okay? So dorsal or posterior ramus, and that's this, so kind of tough to see on this model. So here's the spinal nerve. Right here, all right? And then you've got this branch that's coming off right here. Ah, come on now, work for me. The little branch is coming off, and it's going to go all the way back. And that's going to innervate, all right, the deep muscles of your spine, or I should say, of your back, and then all the skin on your back. That's that first branch that comes off the spinal nerve. So the remaining part, right, is over here, right? This is what I was talking about, the anterior ramus. You can call it either the ventral ramus or you can call it the anterior ramus, okay? Either or. Ventral ramus or anterior ramus. That's the bigger of the two. The smaller one is the dorsal ramus or the posterior ramus, right? And the anterior ramus in our trunk is going to innervate the side of our trunk, and then the front. Okay? It's going to innervate all that. Then the anterior ramus is also going to innervate the upper and lower limbs. Remember, because it's going to form the brachial plexus. It's going to contribute to it's going to create the lumbar and sacral plexus. Okay? So there's one last branch that comes off. Okay? That's this little guy right here. Okay? And we refer to that as the ramus communicans or the rami communicantes. And that's this little branch, all right, that's going to come off of the nerve, the anterior ramus there, and go. It's going to connect the anterior ramus to the sympathetic trunk. That's what this is supposed to represent, is the sympathetic trunk. Or chain. All right, so this little short little branch here, right, that's the rami communicantes, which connects the anterior ramus to sympathetic chain. And that is it for the spinal cord. Only one more chapter of labeling, folks. The eye and the ear. Oh, and the vestibular system. I know. It is, you know, there's a certain amount of relief that most people get when they know that we only have one more chapter of labeling. We're a little bit behind in lecture. I'm not worried, though, because there's plenty of time. I've got plenty of review days that I can use to teach, and we'll still have time to review. Oh, I didn't tell you guys about this. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm a bad person. For your assistance in this course, if need be, if you go on to YouTube, right, and you type in this awesome person's name, you'll scroll down. Say what? He's got a YouTube channel. I only have one subscriber, but it's okay. I wasn't planning on having any. But oh wait, I am so sorry, yo. Bad boy. Hold on one second. For you folks at home, naughty boy. Hold on one second. I did not share the screen. All right, let me share the screen with you guys. It's real quick. All right. So go to YouTube. Punch in my name. Don't misspell it. All right, it's easy to do. All right, and then scroll down and see this goofy face with me with a beard. All right, click on that. Bam. All of the lab and lecture videos are on here, but not only that, I have some review videos on here from the earlier chapters. Now, I don't have all of them, okay? But if you look, I got chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 9. Those are just their review videos, all right? So they won't be as long. Plus, they're older, so in case you want to brush up, you can watch them, okay? So I'll be I probably won't be able to, I'm not going to probably have time during the semester to post the remaining videos, but that's fine. There's plenty of the other ones there, right? So you just go to my YouTube channel, have at it, all right? You know, just in case. I know I've already sent you most of these, but you guys don't have the review videos, okay? So that will be something. Stop